All right, Susan, welcome to Easy Conversations today. How's your day been so far?
I'm good. I'm great, actually.
It sounds, based on our conversation previously, you've got quite the story to share. So I'm excited to jump into that and share with the listeners as well. Before we go down that route, I often like to give the guest an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about themselves, what's brought
Mhm.
them here, and what they've been doing with their lives.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, where do you want me to start?
Anywhere, wherever you think would be most fitting.
I can tell your listeners where I started and why I wrote my book. So I'll make it very short, sweet, and to the point. I am the daughter of I am the daughter of a Los Angeles police detective, and he was ambushed and murdered in 1985 when I was 17 years old.
Mhm.
He was killed at my brother's school in front of my 6-year-old brother at the time, and then my mom and I were called to the scene. So we witnessed his body in the aftermath. And what came of that was the repercussions of a 17-year-old trying to deal with what I saw and navigate all of the emotions around that.
Yeah.
Back then, there wasn't really any talk about PTSD, and there certainly wasn't any talk about mental health, and there were no resources in 1985. So it was challenging at best. The
Mhm.
only people that I could rely on were the adults around me. I just I did what I could. I didn't know how to I didn't know how to navigate any of that. And the night my dad was killed, there was just so much chaos around, a lot of chaos. And my mom made the decision after talking to a detective that she was going to send me to a neighbor's house. And I was going to have to navigate all of this stuff by myself. I really, at that point, wanted even though I wanted to be out of there, I wanted to be away from it, I still needed to be with my family. I didn't know if my brother was okay. I didn't know if he had been hurt in what happened, and I really struggled with it. So, it was it made it a little bit harder because I my poor neighbor was trying to wrap her head about around what was going on. And and she didn't know quite what to say or how to support me in the way that I needed to be. And at the time, I was dating a young man who is now my husband. I had to be the one to tell him.
Mhm.
And we only dated for about 3 months before my dad was killed. Most guys, I don't know if you feel about this, but, like, most guys at 19 years old dealing with this would have hightailed it out of there, but he chose not to, and I think he did because he knew that I was lacking in the support,
Mhm.
and he knew that I was gonna need a friend just for the support, not that he knew how to support me, because honestly, nobody did.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, when when murder is involved, it's different than if it was an illness or a heart attack or something like that, and mostly people didn't know how to approach me or
Mhm.
what to say. So it just made it very challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And there's a lot to explore there.
Mhm.
One of the first things, are you able to share some of the details around the killing
Mhm.
and perhaps a little bit about your father too at
Oh,
the
yeah,
time in
absolutely.
terms of the work he was doing? Why was he targeted and ambushed?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I can. I So my dad, like I said, was a detective. He was a robbery homicide detective, and he, was working on a case where it involved a robbery ring. The, uh the suspect was, on trial at the time, and so my dad actually testified that day.
Mhm.
The the defendant was actually on bail. He was
Mhm.
out on bail during his trial. So it gave him the opportunity to go to the school and lay in wait. And so this what most people don't understand about the situation is that it was a planned out assassination of a police officer. It was planned for many months. At the time, my dad and we had a really great relationship. And my dad, as a human being, was one of those people that if you were having a conversation with him, he was present
Mhm.
and he really listened to what you said. And he always made you feel very important, right? No matter what it was. I hear stories, even to today, about who he was on the job and how much respect people had for him and how he would take people under his wing as far as there were new officers and things like that. So he had a lot of pride in his
Mhm.
job, and he had a lot of pride for his children. And and when my dad was killed and him being a detective, I had a false sense of security. Because he was a detective, I just thought that he was on a tape. He was at a desk. He was not out there. He wasn't on the streets anymore. And so that gave me a false sense of security. So when this happened, it just completely blew my mind. It blew myself up, my sense of security for myself too, because now the one person that was my protector was gone.
Mhm.
And also, he was also the between my mom and him.
Mhm.
My mom and me, excuse me. Not enough coffee today.
Yeah. All
Uh,
good.
but so when he was killed, that was the other complication that happened was that I didn't know how I was going to navigate that relationship between my mother and I. And so that was a whole nother complication to deal with.
Yeah.
And especially as a teenage girl.
Yeah.
Teenagers already battle their parents. It's normal, right? You're always going to have some kind of battle with your
Mhm.
kids. But I really didn't understand my mother at the time. Like, I didn't understand some of her mentality. And I felt when she sent me away that night, it gave me a mindset of I was not important.
Mhm. Yeah.
And even the media, when this happened, the media took 2 days to figure out he had a teenage daughter because all the focus was obviously on my brother since he witnessed the killing and my mom. And so be it. Well, he was a 6-year-old child that just went through the most traumatic experience ever. So it was a lot to navigate, for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. Definitely appreciate that. And how's your brother's journey been with all of this? And obviously, you can't really speak to it, uh, maybe more so from an outsider's perspective,
Yeah.
but not what he's had to battle with. But how has he managed to come out of all of this?
He's My brother and I are very close. My mother and him both took a different road, and his was addiction, and he made some bad choices in his life, and he did get in trouble. However, he has risen up from it. I call him my Hercules because, one, he's 6'2" and almost 300 pounds, so he's a very big guy.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other end of that, he has been through so much in his life, and he has found strength from I don't know where to rise above it. And he is doing good right now. He's in his healing journey presently. And he just last year, he married the love of his life, and he's a stepdad, and now he's a grandpa, and he's got a beautiful daughter, biological daughter. And I'm really proud of him because he's changed his life. He's turned his life around, and he made that choice to do that.
Yeah.
He's doing really good. I'm very proud of him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's good to hear as well. And you shared like this happened in 1985, so almost 40 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Why has it been so important for you to continue to talk about it even till today? And I'm assuming part of your book, we'll jump into that as well. But
Mm.
why has it been such an important thing for you to focus on and continue to talk about?
Yeah. I think that what I realized was when I finally started my healing journey, it didn't happen for many years.
Mm,
And I lived for 14 years with the idea that nobody could help me and I was going to have to deal with for the rest of my life. And when I did finally get the help that I needed and the proper help that I needed, what I realized is that there's a lot of people out there that felt like me. They felt crazy. They felt broken. They felt like there was nothing that could help them.
mhm,
And so in my journey, I realized that I could take my experiences and what I've learned and teach other people
mhm,
and give people hope. I didn't know how I was going to do it while I was in that journey. And it wasn't until I was right in my mind and I had the tools because writing a book, the reason I wrote the book obviously was to heal myself, but there was a lot of fear around writing my book as well. And it was the fear of me telling my truth
mhm,
because I knew that in telling my truth, I would be exposing other people. And I didn't, for my mom, for example, I was afraid that it was going to blow up m- the remainder of my relationship with her. It could cause issues in my marriage, just all the things, not to mention safety.
mhm,
And I just had to think about why I was writing the book and who I could help. And I put those faces in front of me So anytime I felt overwhelmed and I felt, oh my gosh, I'm not sure I can continue to do this because in writing my book, I had to allow myself to really dive deep
Mhm,
and relive and re experience all of the emotions that I went through in the very beginning. But that
mhm.
was the only way that I was going to be able to take my reader on that journey. And it was important when I had those fears. That's what I thought of. I put my purpose in front of me and I have a tagline, bulldoze your fear, because that's what I had to do several times in the process. And
Mhm.
I've had to do it several times in my life, more times than I, wanted to, but I've always had to set fear aside to be able to do what I needed to do.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really important message. And my whole the whole priority of writing my book was to give people hope and let them see that they aren't crazy and they aren't broken. And if they do the work with a professional, obviously, but when they do the work, the freedom that it gives you from the pain is indescribable.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and to your point, the fear can be crippling,
Yeah.
right? Because we will tend to avoid the smallest feeling of discomfort, so it's easier to just project this fear and make a worst case scenario and
Hmm.
remain stagnant, and then healing, unfortunately, doesn't happen if we
Right.
remain in fear,
Exactly. Yep.
and that healing process isn't linear either, so I'm just curious to understand for you,
There is
because
no
I'm sure.
one size fits all.
Right,
Yep.
exactly, and I'm assuming there was probably a lot of days or times as part of your healing journey where you felt like maybe you were going backwards or regressing,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
that's part of the process, but that can also be discouraging for us when we're trying to get through whatever we're
Right.
trying to get through.
Exactly.
So what allowed you to stick with it? And like you said, it's not a one size fits all, but I'm just curious to hear your journey with it in terms of the moments where you did feel discouraged or the moments where you've started doubting yourself, or just recognizing that maybe this is not something I can do. How were you able to push forward and maintain that momentum?
When I finally realized that I could heal from it,
Mhm.
it gave me hope.
Yeah.
And not just for me, though. My big why was my kids. And when I started this healing journey, I was a mom.
Mm,
And I felt like I was lacking some things in my relationship with my mother that I never wanted my kids to experience. And I knew that if I didn't do the work on myself, I was taking away from being the best mom that I could be to my kids.
mhm,
So they were my husband and my kids were my North Star,
mhm,
and they were my big why. They were the reason why I kept moving forward
mhm,
in my healing. Because I knew that if I didn't heal myself, my biggest fear was that I was going to mess up my kids.
mhm.
And let's face it, as parents, we're not perfect and we make mistakes. But I think it was really important for me, especially to be the best mom I could be, the best parent I could be. And even then, in my healing, I wasn't the best wife that I could be. I had been living in fight or flight pretty much my whole life for so many years. And when you're in that, you're in survival mode. You're just you're fighting for it every single day. But what that does is it takes away from the people around you as well.
Right.
And I'm not done. Growth and healing is ever evolving.
Yeah.
And I still have triggers. I still have certain things that come up for me. I think the best part of that is knowing that I have the tools to help me come out of it,
Right.
to give me the support that I need myself. Whereas I
Yeah.
didn't have that for so many years. And when you do have those things, when you have that the tools in your toolbox and you can pull from those when you're going down a bad road or you're spiraling or whatever it is, it gives you a sense of you're taking your power back from whatever it was that happened, right? Or whatever the situation was. So for me, I felt like I have more power within myself to help myself get through whatever it is
Mm.
which triggered me.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times we get stuck in this frame of mind where we feel like these things are happening to us
Mhm.
and we're the victim in the story. But to your point, when you start realizing that, yes, the situation, and especially what you've shared, is not great, this is very traumatic, or the situation in general is something I can perhaps take and do something with it, that's when we have that liberation and the agency to influence how we come out of it, what growth can look like, what healing can look like.
Yeah,
Obviously, we don't know the full picture because, to your point, that healing journey is never ending. And it's not necessarily a destination that you can just get to one day
yeah,
and that's it. It's an
exactly.
on it's an ongoing thing, but that's part of life, right?
It
So
is.
were there times for you also along the healing journey? I know you looked at it as, okay, my husband and my children, but at the end of the day, what really happens is we have to fill our cup so
Yep,
then we can pour for other
yep.
people in our lives. But were there times where you just felt like that victim in your story, especially with how things transpired for your father, right?
Yeah, I get this question a lot.
Mhm,
Owed very differently.
mhm,
And maybe some people feel this way, but my mom and my brother took the victim road. And I never had that mentality.
mm,
And I feel like from the very get go, my own thought process was if I turn into this victim because of what happened and because I was st- my father was stolen from me and I was a senior in high school that year. So many things going on. And then you think about getting married and having kids and him not being there or whatever. I from the get-go did not want to give these guys that power over me. I saw what it was doing to my mother. My mom dealt with her pain, and I don't blame her. Like, people deal with trauma and loss in different ways, and they have
mhm,
different coping mechanisms, right? So she chose alcohol, and she turtled into herself. And so I was left to fend for myself and figure it out. But
mhm,
I think my mentality from the very beginning, though, was that I watched what she was doing, and I watched as my brother got older and started making some bad
mhm,
choices in his life, that in my mind, they were giving power to these men that took my dad. And I didn't want that ever. And
yeah,
so that's what I thought about. and it didn't allow me to go into the "poor me, this happened to me" mode. Yeah, it sucks. It was a terrible thing that happened, but I only thought that it would exacerbate the issue if I did not find it in myself to not hold the anger and let it just eat up my soul. Because I watched it happen to my mother, and even till today, right? She lost her identity that night. I lost my mom and my dad.
Yeah.
And so I that was the most important thing for me was, and maybe that was my dad. I'm my father's daughter for sure, but I just didn't want it. They already took my dad and they were not gonna take my life in that way. So, I the mentality, and then a lot of the survivor mentality as well is that I had to find a way to forgive these men. And there's a lot of there's a lot of misunderstanding about forgiveness, and a lot of it is, and how I explain it is this: when you find forgiveness, you're doing it for yourself. You're not doing it for that person. You're not forgetting what they did, right? You're not downplaying it. You're not doing any of that. But what you're doing is you're taking your power back. And you're doing this for yourself, right? Because the priority should be yourself, uh,
Absolutely.
especially if you've gone through a traumatic experience. You need to be the priority because once you heal, like I said before, it has a ripple effect, right? I think it's important that people understand that when you are forgiving someone, that is not a sign of weakness. You're not bowing down to this situation or the person, right? What you're doing is you're saying, I'm not going to allow you to hurt me any longer.
Yeah. 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 And I appreciate the forgiveness part that you shared because that's so crucial because that's part of where if we don't have forgiveness, we'll continue to remain in that victim mode or have resentment. And to your point, that forgiveness isn't for the other person because they're not even there to receive it
Right,
at times. It's really for yourself to free yourself
right.
from the chains of their actions or behaviors or whatever may have happened. And there's so much freedom that comes from it. And then you're actually able to move forward. Otherwise, you remain stuck, as we've talked about. There's that other piece around your relationship with your mother that I wanted to explore a little bit further because you shared even on that day when that incident happened, you were kind of left with the neighbors, which can induce a feeling of abandonment. And
Mhm,
this comes with no judgment because I feel like we are all, especially as parents, we're doing the best with what we have,
mhm.
right? And it's always easier to look back in hindsight and question some of our choices. So there's that piece there, but you've said the relationship with your mom wasn't always the best as you've continued to both work in different ways and how you handle the situation. How are things now, and have you been able to find some peace even from that one day in 1985?
I'll tell you what, it wasn't until I started the process of the editing of my book and having to reread it where I realized that, when I know this word gets thrown around a lot, but
Mhm.
what I realized is that my mom has a narcissistic personality.
Mhm.
She has always been that way. And I spent many years in guilt and shame because I felt like I was healing. She was still a victim, and it was my job one being the older child, it was my job to help her heal.
Mm.
And I thought that if she saw the positive things that I was doing, that maybe it would rub off on her. I don't know. But my mentality with her my whole life has been, if I do this, mom will love me more. If I do this, then she'll understand where I'm coming from. She'll be open to having conversations around it. She will understand me for the first time ever. And I had this fantasy that one day she's going to have some kind of epiphany and wake up and I'm going to have the Hallmark holiday mother.
Mm.
And it never happened. And so when I started to read it, I started to realize that this has been an ongoing issue before my dad was killed,
Mhm.
right? My mom has been showing me who she is my whole life. I just didn't want to see it.
Mm.
And it wasn't until last year, and I'm 55. It wasn't until last year that I realized that, oh my God, there is not anything that I can do that is going to make my mom understand my point of view or understand my pain. Or so the bottom line was I sat down with my mom and I had a conversation with her because in the 4.5 years it took me to write my book, she never asked me what it was about. She never asked me what I was writing. And it wasn't until she found out that I had an editor that she was like, "Oh, this is a real deal. This is really happening." And I said, "Yeah, mom, this is important to me."
Mhm.
But in her mind, it was just a joke. Like it was just a hobby. It was just a whatever. And before it got put out there, I knew that some of the things that I wrote in there were going to be hard for her to read. But I also understood that she does have a narcissistic personality. And having a conversation with her, I really had to step back and be empathetic, but at the same time, not allow her to engage me
Mhm.
in gaslighting, just making me feel like I'm crazy or that the things that I spoke about or speak about are not true or whatever. And so I had this conversation with her and I did exactly that. I was very empathetic and I told her flat out, here's the thing. There are going to be things in here that you're going to read that aren't going to be easy for you to read.
Mhm.
And I laid it all out for her. I was 100% honest with her. And I told her, I said, I am going to talk about feeling abandoned.
Mhm.
I am going to talk about generational abuse. I'm going to talk about your drinking and how that affected me. And I just put it all out there. I was 100% honest with her instead of putting it out and then having her read it and not knowing anything. So I was trying to be as respectful as I could with her. And she did, I did ask her about the night that she sent me away.
Mhm.
She really couldn't answer it. She just said, maybe I was trying to protect you. And
Yeah.
I left it at that, right? Because if I had argued with her or it wouldn't have gone anywhere. And so I just left it at that. If that's what she feels in her mind, the reason, then that was her reason, right?
Right.
So When the book came out, I hand delivered her a book and wrote her a note in it, and she set it down with her mail and walked away from it. And
Mhm,
I thought, "Okay, that's fine. Whatever." About 45 minutes later, I got a call from her, and she had read the first 2 chapters. And she said, "This is written very well, and you did a good job, and this is amazing." And in my mind, I was like, "She's not done yet. So the jury is out. That
yeah,
we just wait." But in that moment, I took in that what she said was she was proud of me. And I took that in and I appreciated it. So after she read the first 2 chapters, I never heard anything from her after that. And she didn't call me, she didn't there was no communication, and the only communication came from my brother. And I was notified that I was now out of the will and that she was really angry and that she only honed in on the drinking part. That was the most important thing that she took from my book. Not that her daughter was suicidal, not that her daughter had panic attacks, not that her daughter struggled for 14 years, not having the support system and knowing how to get through this or move through these emotions and being on the verge of taking my own life. There was no consideration of that at all. And so she made that decision to stop talking to me. So
mhm,
we are in no communication. And I can tell you honestly that when I wrote the book, I knew that this was a possibility.
mhm,
It would either been a conversation between my mother and I and start to heal our relationship, or it would blow it up and that would be it, right? And I had to be okay with either scenario.
mhm, mm,
What I find is that when you're in a toxic, narcissistic, abusive relationship, it takes you a long time to heal from that too. So I'm healing from that right
mhm,
now. However, I had to protect my own peace. And that's the lesson I had to learn from this is that she is going to be who she is innately, and I'm not going to change that. And I have no control over changing that. And she will not allow that to change. So
mm,
I need to be at peace myself.
mhm,
And for the first time, I feel that deeply that I am at peace with not having communication with her. Now, do
mhm,
I think it's sad? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's sad, right? But
mm,
the choices that she has made in her life, it's her life.
mhm,
And I do what's best for myself for the first time forever.
mhm,
And so it's not an easy decision to stop communication, especially with a parent, but it's also more important to not stay in a toxic relationship.
right.
So, yeah, it's hard. It's hard,
Mhm,
but at the same time, it wasn't my decision.
mhm,
It was
mhm.
hers. And I'm going to
Yeah, no, and what I'm hearing from you there is there's this acceptance around what is within your control, as you said, and what's not, and there's this aspect of letting go, which are both very crucial steps in the healing journey. because I think letting go is the toughest thing because we have these expectations, we have these wants and desires of how we envision things, and anytime we fall short, it's hard to let go and
Yep.
know where you can draw that line. And I think drawing that line also means setting boundaries.
Mhm.
And what I'm again hearing from you with respect to the boundary part is holding space for your own experiences, irrespective of how she may interpret that or how she may internalize that. You can't apologize for the experience you had,
Right.
and you're holding space for that. And that was what was illustrated in your book. And that perhaps triggered her, which led her to react in certain ways. But that's the crucial part, right? Is how can you set boundaries and let go, which are fundamental for one's healing journey. Now, there's a lot of often what I find we tend to have deeper connections with various people in our lives.
Mhm.
And sometimes you can't explain those connections. What I'm hearing from you is you had something like that with your father. And looking back now, even after all these years, what do you think he would want for you and everything you've done? What do you think how he would feel if he were around or now at this point, seeing how far you've come with
Yeah. It's funny because I always joke around that I felt like my dad was literally kicking me in the rear end to get this book done, like,
mm,
literally. And I felt his presence the whole entire time. I know that, and I tell people this, and some people think they look at me with I'm green with pink polka dots when I say this, but my purpose was in his death, and his purpose was in his death because good is coming from this evil act.
mm,
And I think that was the legacy that he always wanted to portray. Um, I feel like I'm changing the legacy a bit and turning it into something that's more positive and more loving and more hopeful. And I feel like my dad is, is right alongside me.
mhm,
I feel like when I say I'm my father's daughter, that's exactly it. Like we have very much the same mentality about things. And I 100% believe that he's proud of me. And I work every day to make sure that he stays proud of me and that I am continuing to do the right things in his memory and his legacy, and not just for myself, but for my kids and my future grandchildren when they come and all all of those people that I love, and they can look back and the same things about me that people say about my father.
mhm, mhm,
So I just feel like that's what he feels too. I feel like
mhm,
that he would feel that way too, and
mhm,
this is the direction he would want me to go, is to be the best person that I can be, the best, and to live my life wholeheartedly
mhm,
and without hatred and without any of that, and acceptance.
mhm. Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think at the end of the day, irrespective of the situation, and I, again, not to undermine the experience that it had for you, it's what we draw meaning from is what matters at the end of the day
Mhm,
and what we're able to do with it. And to your point, it's been that purpose that you found in your life, but also looking at what his purpose would have been
mhm,
and giving back to the world in that sense. So I think that's amazing and beautiful. And thank you for sharing all of that. Thank you for sharing your story. um, and everything around it, being so vulnerable. I really appreciate it. And at, one of the things I do like to give the guests an opportunity to share with the listeners, if listeners want to find your book or
Mhm.
find you online, what are some ways they can do that?
Oh, yeah. So, um, I did wanna tell you that I am a speaker,
Mhm.
so I do speak on stages, and I do virtual events and things like that. But also just to connect with people, they can go to my website, which is susansnowspeaks.com,
Mhm.
and there's a way that you can contact me through there. I am on social media with my own name, Susan Snow. And as far as the book, my book is available on Amazon. It is in paperback form, or you can order it through Kindle. If you're a Kindle Unlimited customer, you can read my book for free. And all I ask is if you do read my book, if you do purchase it and read it, to give me a review, good, bad, or indifferent, it doesn't matter. Even if you hated it, it doesn't matter. So, yeah, I'm always open to speaking to people who might be stuck or not know where to start, or maybe they heard the same things that they are feeling currently about feeling crazy or not having hope moving forward. And
Mhm.
I'm always open to hearing people's stories and giving them the support and the hope that they need.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you, Susan. And thank you for sharing everything today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.